Good day. Today we are going to cover soda. And I want to start with this because, as you'll see, it looks a little weird, right? The color has kind of gone out of it. The bottle itself has depressed. I bought this when I first started teaching a food history course. It's a 2001 Christmas edition, which means that it's 15 years old right now. It's been sitting on my shelf that long, and this is what happened to it. I'm not about to drink it, but I've used it as an example of the strange things that can go into our mass-produced food. So I think it's just very fitting that it's still sitting on my shelf. And why I'm wearing this very ridiculous hat, I'm not going to reveal quite yet. But you may wonder why I'm including what is widely considered an innocuous soft drink among the intoxicating beverages. Well, we all know that it is extremely contentious right now. Cities have often banned the big gulp sort of sizing, and some have banned it in schools. And people are considering that this is really something very bad for our health, and that it's a good example of possibly a kind of prohibition. I don't know. There's certainly a lot of public sentiment against soda. And on some level also, I think very significantly, it shares some of the same history, especially since, of course, many of the brands did contain drugs, right? Coca-Cola especially. And soft drinks also interestingly trace this same trajectory from medicinal to recreational drug that many of the alcohol and intoxicants that we've been talking about do. So their history is actually very, very closely entwined with alcohol, especially since for those who proposed a prohibition or ban, it was often the sobering alternative to alcohol. And you might argue, of course, sodas are very important as mixers also, so they're very closely entwined with alcohol, and I think they're integral to this whole larger story. And I think also what is really interesting, even since I've written this lecture, has been the meteoric rise of what are considered hard sodas, things that are root beer or cola or whatever flavored in the stores. And what is really interesting to me is that these actually replicate the earliest forms of soda, which of course were fermented and fizzy naturally and often contained a low grade alcohol. Remember ginger beer? It was beer to start with, or ale, right? So we'll come back to those. And I don't think many historians see the connection between the hard alcohol, hard sodas that they're selling now and the origins of soda itself. So let's try to analyze this phenomenon of soda drinking from a historical, from an anthropological, from a sociological perspective. Let's think about who drinks it and why. You know, what's the social setting? Does it have any class-based associations like the drinks we've been talking about do? And why and how does it come to be indelibly associated with the U.S.? Is it just because it's a U.S. invention, or the modern brands are products of United States industry? Now, obviously, the reason is because it's the American companies that have aggressively sold soda around the world. But I want to also think about what it means to those people who consume it. It's obviously a different thing in the U.S. than it is elsewhere. And elsewhere, strangely enough, I think people will find people who consider it to be a symbol of progress and modernity, even though we may see it as a symbol of economic domination and oppression, and forcing our kind of high fructose corn syrup down other people's throats, literally, right? And is it actually an innocuous drink? Is it at the root of everything that's wrong with our food system? You might argue, yeah, it is actually. It's the worst example. Cola is essentially a convenient way for us to dispose of corn syrup that we pay for through subsidies to support corn. And we've, of course, support them, encourage them to support it. These subsidies come out of our tax money. So basically, we are paying to make Coca-Cola, ultimately. And then we complain after people buy it and the vast quantities that they consume and when they become obese and things like that. So it's ultimately, a weird kind of conundrum that we are, against our will, paying to sponsor obesity. That's really what it comes down to, as well as the programs that are publicly funded to fuel anti-obesity, or to counteract it, let's say. So the left hand knows not what the right hand is doing, literally in this case. But let's start with a little history and some details that I think may surprise you. Soda is actually not the invention of the industrial age. Um, though they have in the past century, large corporations have completely obliterated the earlier forms that most people have kind of forgotten ever existed, to tell you the truth. You can actually make soda very, very easily at home, even without carbonation. There have always been effervescent mineral waters. People have always drank those. That became fashionable to drink and, of course, to bathe in also for centuries. The Romans did it in the 18th century. Englishmen did it in places like Bath. Spa is an actual place where people would go to take the mineral waters. And there's spas like that throughout Italy and Germany, and Baden, means bath literally in German. So, so the past few decades, of course, water has become its own odd thing to sell and be seen drinking. Effervescent water, either natural mineral water that has the carbonation in it by nature, or sometimes they actually just add fizz to it, which is a cartridge. And there are some astonishingly good ones for sale. I'm not trying to detract from these at all. They're often distributed by the soda companies because they don't want to compete with themselves, so they sell this kind of lower calorie, no calorie version of something that's refreshing and tasty. So that's, I won't talk about water per se, although obviously, to be seen holding a bottle of Perrier or San Pellegrino has its own interesting social connotations. But I want to talk about those things that are effervescent beverages that are fermented with bacteria. Okay, because this is a whole class of things that have just kind of disappeared. They sometimes involve yeast, but if alcohol is produced, it's usually not more than 2 or 3%, but it is a kind of a low-grade alcohol. They're not considered alcoholic beverages legally, although in fact kombucha has to have it on the label, and I think you might even need to be 21 to buy it in some states because it can contain 2% alcohol. You know what kombucha is, right? It's tea that has a acetobacter raft of bacteria on it and converts it to sourness, basically, to acetic acid. The sugar and alcohol will convert, but it usually does contain some alcohol still. But in any case, let's talk about the others that are less familiar. It's mostly lactobacilli. Okay, that's what makes it sour, and sometimes other molds. Some usually in concert with yeast, forming this kind of symbiotic community of bacteria and yeast. And this is going to sound really weird, but it is called a SCOBY. Okay, and if you like, I can even bring one into class to show you what these look like. It's sort of a little rubbery, snot-like raft of bacteria that floats on the top of usually to make vinegar, actually, from wine, but it also is used to make kinds of sodas. And you find it in kombucha. That's also pretty much the same kind of little community. SCOBY, SCOBY. It stands for, what does it stand for? A symbiotic community of bacteria and yeast. Okay, it's a SCOBY. And kombucha, what's really very interesting is that in Japan they've never heard of such a thing. It means kombu, which is seaweed, and tea, which is it's clearly not that. In the U.S., it's an American phenomenon, strangely enough. In any case, the fermented bacteria itself is widely regarded as health promoting, since of course we have this internal intestinal flora, or let's call it a microbiome, whose DNA has recently been mapped. And it turns out, I know this comes as a surprise to people, that most of the cells in our bodies are not us. Okay, the sheer numbers, they outnumber us. Bacteria, which we depend on not only for digestion, but for our lymph system, for brain functions, they are integral. And when I say we're symbiotic, I'm not speaking poetically. They literally, we benefit from them, they benefit from us. We could not live without them. True symbiotes. And I think, consider that the next time you rub some antibacterial goo on your hand or something like that, you're murdering them. You're actually doing yourself a terrible disservice. And our attitude toward them, an entirely modern phenomenon, is that bacteria are all bad, kill them, right? Unless we can control it, and the way Pasteur would have in making beer, you have one little strain or one little type of yeast that's good for bread making, but all the other wild ones, we take an attitude toward them that they're better off dead. Well, this is speciesist. right? In other words, it's like being racist or sexist or anything. We're discriminating against an entire huge swathes of the living matter because it's inconvenient to us and because a couple of them actually might make you sick. And so rather than control those few, we kill them all. And to our great detriment, I should say. So, and the other thing which I should mention is when you buy something that's supposed to be probiotic, it's also usually one controlled species. It's not what would be floating around normally in your gut. So, in any case, these fermented beverages, things that are made with a SCOBY or with what's called a ginger bug, which is basically just yeast that grows and bacteria that grows on the outside of ginger. You put it in water with sugar and it starts to fizz and bubble. It's lovely. If you cap these, they create their own carbonation. Just as wine gives off CO2 in fermenting, other fruits, other vegetables will do it also, like pickles will do it also. So, but if you keep this in a canister and you put into, you pump in syrup and water, that's the way modern soda is made. But it does actually happen spontaneously if you are fermenting the fruits. It happens also, of course, naturally in champagne and beer. And like these, of course, judging the exact percentage of yeast and carbonation that you want in it is absolutely crucial, or it can explode. Right, soda can explode, beer can. It happened to the wine we made. I capped it too early. But let's imagine that in this category of naturally fermented soft drinks, the first one I want to discuss is what's called ginger beer. Okay? It is made by creating a starter, which is called a ginger bug, as I've mentioned. It's the ginger peeled or sliced with the skin on. And actually, interestingly, you can't buy this from a supermarket because they usually irradiate the ginger, so it doesn't have mold or bugs, and it's killed all the good bacteria on it. But in any case, you get organic ginger or stuff from the farmer's market. You slice it, you add sugar and some water, and you stir it every day. And then you add a little more ginger and a little more sugar, and then it starts bubbling. You cap up the thing. And remember, the bacteria are everywhere to start with. You don't have to add this in any way. And then you make a big batch of this called sort of ginger tea. You strain it. Once you cap it on, it'll start fermenting, and the fizz will bubble up inside of it at room temperature, and it becomes naturally fizzy. And I just give you this because it's like one example of what has been traditionally done at home, very, very simply, almost no cost. When you put it in the refrigerator, it actually stops the fermentation, so you can keep it around for quite a while if you like. Okay, and as I mentioned, it does have just a little bit of alcohol, probably 2 or 3% in it, so hence it technically qualifies as a beer. And we, of course, still use the word ginger ale, which is sort of reminiscent of that. The stuff that you buy in the supermarket, of course, is not made that way. That's artificial flavoring and carbonation and syrup and whatever, it's done in a factory. It's not naturally fermented. There are other beverages like these, and let me talk about them briefly. One is called kvass, K-V-A-S-S. It's made with stale bread, which of course has yeast in it already. Let me give you an example. This is in Elena Molokovets. It's a Russian cookbook of 1861. She said kvass is such an iconic drink for Russians that she uses it to define Russianness. So interestingly, it is actually a nationalistic drink. Just like vodka is, this is considered to be the healthier one, the sort of refreshing drink that you buy it in the street. Actually, there are vendors with big containers of it that will just pour you a cup right on the street. And what's interesting is it's made from sourdough starter of flour and water. You take old rye or other sourdough bread, you chop it up, you cover it with boiling water, you put a weight on top of it so it's submerged, just exactly like you would pickles. And the next day you strain it off, you add some honey or sugar, some lemon juice, you let it ferment for a couple of days, and it will bubble, it'll start bubbling, and you bottle this stuff. So it's kind of got this really interesting, it's very sour, it's got low alcohol, and it's fizzy, very, very refreshing drink that doesn't exist in this country at all. We would have to qualify it as beer, but it's got such a delightful, and it's a great way to use up your leftover bread, as you can chuck it in. And there's actually one that I've done that's a little more effective. The way I usually done it is I'll take bread and some raw dried chickpeas, and I'll put in some bulgur wheat that's raw. And those things usually have yeast on them, and it kicks up the fermentation much quicker. I've done this actually recently. In fact, if I have a jar, I'll look for it on the shelf and bring it on the next class. Very similar to these is something else which has this same term, is called, the same word beer, is root beer. Okay, and it can be made of a couple of different roots, but it's usually sassafras, which is a plant that grows all the way along up the East Coast. And you can tell because it looks like a little mitten if you ever see it growing wild, which I don't think it does in California, but it'll look like a 3-part mitten, a 2-part mitten, or a 1-part mitten. It's really kind of cute. So, or it's made from sarsaparilla, which is from Mexico. And you can use licorice root in it also. You can use horehound. You can use lots of different things. But the first two of these, the sassafras and the sarsaparilla, I want to talk about these because they are New World drugs. They set off a kind of let's call it a mad rush to find medicinal plants in the New World, sponsored, which was stimulated by discoveries by Vespucci, by books like Thomas More's, which is why I'm wearing this silly hat for this lecture. I know that was a stretch, but it was on my shelf, so I thought I'd wear it. But it's books like that cause people to rush to the New World and dig up as much of these roots as they can, find medicinal virtues for them. And the procedure is exactly the same. You chop up the roots, you add sugar, you cool it, you add a starter, a ginger bug or yeast or even a water kefir starter will work on these things. And traditionally you would just use, once you've got it going, you use some of the previous batch to get the new batch started. And this way you can also ferment any kind of fruit. You can add raspberries, strawberries, grapes, oranges. These were all popular sodas in the early industrial age, okay? Or even before the industrial age, I should say. There's also another kind of thing which is oddly just come back into fashion, which for reasons I can't explain, is called a shrub. And a shrub is basically vinegar and a fruit syrup that you pour into cold water and dilute it, and it's sour and fruity and just it makes a magnificent cocktail also. But that's a very 18th century thing to do with fruit, is make a shrub out of it, and it keeps on the shelf because it's concentrated syrup of vinegar, and it's great. And put it on a salad dressing, you know what I'm talking about. So now the point I want to make here is that these were very common. These root beers, ginger ale, and shrubs and fruit, low alcohol fruit drinks. All of these are forms of soda, right? And all of them more or less disappear when industrial versions begun to proliferate in the late 19th century. The industrial versions are uniquely American inventions. They also spring directly out of the pharmaceutical industry. Concoctions such as wine mixed with cocaine, which is meant to be tonic and give you some pep. Remember we talked about Vin Mariani. That's exactly what we're talking about here. That's just actually the most famous of these, but it's not the only one. There's also a French, this is a French drink actually patented in 1863 by Angelo Mariani, who was a chemist, who just, made this stuff for people who are feeling untoned and unpeppy and whatever. And everyone drank this. Queen Victoria drank it, presidents, Pope Leo the 13th, Thomas Edison drank it so he could stay up late at night and invent all sorts of cool things. And you can picture him with the light bulb there. Well, he's got his glass of Vin Mariani next to him. But there was no negative association, okay? Cocaine was not considered to be dangerous or anything at this point. And some other manufacturers said, well, if they're gonna make such a big, fortune on this, let's try and come up with some other things that maybe don't taste like wine, that are drinkable, have other medicinal virtues to them. So there's one, John Stith Pemberton was a druggist in Atlanta, who tried to do a cheap knockoff of Vin Mariani, which of course wouldn't have to be imported from France. They could just make it in the US. And this contained mostly wine, a little bit of cocaine, a few other flavorings in it. And he probably would have gone on peddling this stuff and might have even disappeared had not the city pushed through, right as he releases this, a temperance legislation that banned the sale or manufacture of alcohol within the city of Atlanta. Okay, so they're saying no wine is allowed. And Pemberton thought, now what do I do? he was forced to create a new product, and the odd inclusion that he thought of that would be kind of deep and deeply flavored like wine but not be alcohol, was a cola nut. And he hit on this. I mean, do people know where cola comes from? It's actually African, because it's an African nut that people slice. And remember when I was talking about chewing, we talked about people sharing cola nuts. Well, so it was a kind of obscure flavor for the day. It does contain caffeine, but he made a syrup out of the cola nut and coca leaves and some other flavorings, some cloves, some wintergreen, whatever. So let me give you the ingredients, because it's a weird combination, and they don't. I'm pretty sure they. Well, today it's carbonated water, high fructose corn syrup, and/or sucrose, caramel color, phosphoric acid, natural flavors, caffeine. Natural flavors is they don't have to tell you what that means. Well, here it is. Well, this is the original recipe. This is 1 ounce of caffeine citrate, 3 ounces of citric acid, 1 U.S. fluid ounce of vanilla extract. That's surprising. I wouldn't have thought of vanilla in there. 1 U.S. quart of lime juice, 2.5 ounces of flavoring. I don't know what the hell that means, but this is what the recipe is. Merchandise 7X. Okay, that's bought from someone. 30 pounds sugar, 4 U.S. fluid ounces of extract of coca leaves, which is the flavor essence of the coca leaf. I guess it also is flavor. 2.5 U.S. gallons of water, caramel sufficient to give color. So this color actually just comes from the burnt sugar, basically. Mix caffeine acid and lime juice in 1 quart of boiling water. Add vanilla and flavoring when cool. Flavoring, which is the Merchandise 7X. 1 quart of alcohol. 80 oil of orange, 40 oil of cinnamon, 120 oil of lemon, 20 oil of coriander, 40 oil of nutmeg. Nutmeg you can actually taste in there, I think. 40 oil of neroli. And neroli is the very interesting exotic perfume. So here's the irony: is that's the original recipe, which apparently was discovered a few years back in a vault. So someone published it. It's kind of weird, but the irony is that nowadays the flavoring compounds doesn't contain cola anymore. So it was sold then. It's artificially flavored now. It was sold as a nerve tonic and stimulant to cure neuralgia, hysteria, melancholy, nervous disorders. You'd take this cola. So not only did he label it Coca-Cola, but it was launched in a massive advertising campaign, so everyone would be drinking it. The early ads are actually really, really fascinating. They show sort of tarted up genteel Victorian society, and mostly ladies drinking out of elegant little cups in these glamorous settings that look like very fancy restaurants. So I think to start with, they did target very specific social class, and perhaps even aspirant social class. They wanted people who wanted to look like they were wealthy, and so cola may have done it. That's what the ad. So take a look at some of those. Okay, just type in classic Coca-Cola ad or vintage Coca-Cola ad, and you'll see a whole range of these. And we'll of course look at them in class. So the interesting thing is that this product was not yet bottled. It was dispensed from a soda fountain. And this is a kind of unique thing that we just don't see anymore, but it was basically a syrup. You'd pump syrup out, and then you'd have a fountain that you'd squirt carbonated water into it, either with, it could be a phosphate also. That's another way of creating the carbonation, but it's kind of sour. And these were popular by the mid-19th century, not coincidentally, sold in drugstores. That's why drugstores were the place you'd go to get a soda at a soda fountain, right? And root beer sold this way actually predates cola. Hires root beer was the first national soft drink, the first one that's distributed naturally. And you could also buy the syrup yourself and add regular water at home. But the thing is that when they sold this stuff, they marketed it as a temperance drink. Good for the whole family, and something that you wouldn't have to be ashamed of drinking because it's not intoxicating. Okay, it just may have a little caffeine, may pep you up, but it's not. It's going to be the flavor of the roots, the root beer, the sarsaparilla is not, or the sassafras is not going to damage you in any way. Turns out it's actually carcinogenic, or at least there was a report that said that the ground up leaves which are also made into filet powder. If you've ever had a real gumbo, doesn't have okra. It's got the native sassafras gumbo filet. It's got this filet powder. They banned it for a while, actually, as a carcinogenic. But for some reason, it's back on the shelves now. I'm not sure why. In any case, back to soda. James Verner produced the first mass-produced ginger ale in the 1860s. Augustin Thompson created what it was called Moxie, a nerve tonic, in 1876, and you can still find this if you look closely. The very interesting sort of soda sections of Bevmo actually has this. It's sort of weird tasting, and the overwhelming flavor is gentian root, so it is actually quasi-medicinal. But it is still made today. And then all of a sudden, companies start popping up everywhere with this craze for temperance drinks that are fizzy. Okay, a druggist, Charles Alderton in Waco, Texas, started messing around with flavorings and decided to add black cherry. And in 1885 came up with, well, the name is not coincidental, Dr. Pepper. Okay, he was a doctor. Okay, promised vim and vigor and vitality, and it has some caffeine in it, but it's a cold and you can down it quickly and on the go. In fact, another intriguing way to sell soda was also contrived. This took place when Roy Allen in 1919 decided to set up a root beer stand, which you could just drive right up to and get served in your car. You might know the location where this happened in 1919. It's Lodi, California, right up there. And in fact, the number 2 shop was in Stockton, run by his partner, whose name was Frank Wright, who he's sort of one ran the shop up there, one ran the shop down here, and the two of them, of course, combined, the Allen and Wright are the A and W in the root beer. Okay, and their genius was, of course, not that they were selling some marvelous product, but that they sold franchises throughout the country, so people could just buy the syrup from them, use the logo, benefit from this, very large advertising that they did, and hundreds of shops started popping up all over the country and became the first sort of franchised soda chain. Okay, not a pharmacy, but and they'd serve food, of course, and everything. So around the same time, Charles Leeper Grigg in St. Louis was experimenting with various flavor combinations, predominantly something with lemon and lime in it. And he eventually settled on 7 different flavorings, 7 unique flavorings, in what he called bib label lithiated lemon lime soda. And I love the alliteration in that, and I would buy this stuff. But of course, that's way too long and silly a title, so it was changed to 7 Up because of the 7 ingredients. Okay, and I think the real popularity of 7 Up came not because it's such a great drink, although I guess it's okay, it's very sweet, but it's because 7 Up made a wonderful mixer. Okay, it's great. You can add alcohol to it. It will disguise almost any flavoring. So of course, 7 and 7, Seagram 7 and 7 Up, classic combination. And especially during Prohibition, because people were using rot gut, really, really bad, nasty tasting alcohol. So if you add 7 Up to it, it's like, it tastes fine. Clear, and actually clear alcohol in 7 Up is okay. On the other hand, they also advertised this soda so that they would, that mothers would give it to their babies. Remember that ad we saw? Start your kid on 7 Up when they're young, and they shows them guzzling 7 Up in their high chairs. And the ad says, why we have the youngest customers in the ad business. This young man is 11 months old, and he isn't our youngest customer by any means. For 7 Up is so pure, so wholesome, you can even give it to babies and feel good about it. Look at the back of the bottle. Notice all of our ingredients are listed. So they were trying to say this is healthy. Babies, get them started on soda. What a great way to get loyal customers, is addict them from infancy. And you might know, of course, that the ingredients list is not required of soft drinks. And they, of course, they at that time they said, well, we're proud to show you how pure the ingredients are, and people trusted it because they trusted industry, they trusted the manufacturers to give them something good. And it continues. By the way, Mom, when it comes to toddlers, if they like to be coaxed to drink their milk, try this. Add 7 Up to the milk in equal parts, pouring 7 Up gently into the milk. It's a wholesome combination, and it works. and make 7 Up your family drink. Okay, now that is just... Not only that sounds like the most revolting thing on earth, but imagine giving a baby milk and 7 Up and like putting it in a bottle. So, and these were rather successful. You know, these ads got people to drink it. When I was growing up, it was the Uncola ads that were, for people who didn't want cola, 7 Up was the alternative. So, how did Coke, among this strange motley crew of sodas, end up rising to the top in terms not just of sales, but of popularity and global distribution? I think it was really the work not of Pemberton himself, but it was when this company passed into the hands of a chemist named Asa Candler. And it was his idea to start welling the syrup, selling the syrup to soda fountain operators, that they would just, send them a container of syrup and let them mix it themselves. And it was also his idea that anything that the company made in terms of profit should go right back into advertising. So it's a great sort of moral lesson for the power of advertising to change people's minds and to get them to drink things which they wouldn't have in the end. And we'll see that for most of these foods, the late 19th century, it's the ones that advertised a lot that really stuck and sold. So by 1899, he was selling, this is Candler, 281,000 gallons of syrup, which could be made into 36 million glasses of soda a year. And about the turn of the century, he then said, well, I can get another step of this skipped and get people to consume it at home if I can only bottle it. And that, of course, makes it much harder to distribute because you're basically shipping glass then. So what he struck on was this idea that bottling plants could open regionally. He would license them, so they'd have to pay a certain amount, and of course they'd keep some of the profit, but that there would be bottling plants of Coca-Cola all over the country, so you wouldn't have to ship it from one central place. So by 1909, there were 400 Coca-Cola bottling plants in the US that were operated as franchises. So the person has to invest their own money, of course, and pay a fee for the product, the syrup, which goes everywhere. So the cost of distribution was borne by the bottlers, not by the company who sold them the syrup. It's actually an ingenious plan. Pass your costs on to your franchisees and keep the secret formula yourself, so they can't make it themselves. They can't do a knockoff. It was that secret formula that I gave you back then. That's what they weren't told. And of course, as for the cocaine in it, the US government gradually became suspicious of this drug, and the company was targeted. What they decided to do was use spent coca leaves after the extraction of the cocaine for medicinal uses. So it would just get the flavoring, but the stuff that would actually be the psychoactive agent would be sent to the pharmaceutical industry for them to do whatever they wanted with. And apparently the flavor of the leaves was considered an essential part of the process, and it was patented. So they also realized if they weren't using real caffeinated, if they weren't using real cocaine-aided leaves, then it wouldn't pep you up anymore. So that's when they started adding the caffeine instead. In 1903, caffeine replaces the coca. And only in 1929 could they actually claim that they had chemically extracted all the cocaine from the leaves. And nowadays, they won't actually even reveal whether they still use the leaves or not, but there's definitely, obviously, no cocaine in it anymore. And I think also, look at some of the later Coke ads. They are, I think, more than almost any product, they are these really fascinating time capsules of the period when they were made. Not just because the people are wearing distinctive dress, but they reflect the values of those eras, the what an ideal person would look like, the clothes, the lingo, the typeface, the whole kind of aesthetic of each time period is captured so beautifully in these ads. And of course, that's why they did well. They're classic for their success in capturing their markets and capturing the spirit of youth and vitality, whatever. So now you might think, okay, you wonder, okay, he's only talking about Coke so far. What about Pepsi? And you might think Pepsi gave some serious competition to Coke, but it actually didn't until fairly recently. Pepsi had an extraordinarily bumpy and turbulent history. The company was also founded by a pharmacist. This is Caleb Bradham in North Carolina. And his twist was adding something also kind of weird to this whole mix, which was pepsin. Pepsin is supposedly a digestive aid. You have your peptic acid or whatever it is in your stomach that helps you digest. So pepsin was supposed to be an enzyme that helped digestion. So you drink Pepsi after a meal and you'd feel better. In 1898, he christened this stuff Pepsi Cola. Okay. Sounds really kind of weird now that I'm thinking about it. Digestive enzyme soda. Okay, so he tried the same franchising that Coke was doing, but could never quite capture the same market. And in 1922, his company went bankrupt. A couple of years later, it was resurrected, and then during the Depression, it went bankrupt again. Another company bought it. They took out the pepsin and slowly began to buy up the bottling operations. And I think that probably would have worked had not Coke gotten the government contract to supply the armed forces in World War II. That's brilliant. You just give it away to soldiers, and then they're addicted for the rest of their lives, and they come back from war and they want to drink it, right? And the deal that they cut with the government was they said, well, we're not going to be able to supply you with this stuff unless you give us an exclusive contract to purchase the massive quantities of sugar that are going to allow us to fulfill this contractual demand. So they did this. They bought enough sugar to make it, and they sold it to the government, and of course the armed forces just handed it to soldiers. So it was really only in the so Coke won that, Pepsi didn't, is my point. It was really only in the latter half of the 20th century that Pepsi became a serious competitor, and it was through largely advertising campaigns. Pepsi did some smart things. They bought out Frito-Lay, which makes sense. This is the snacks that go with the soda you're drinking, right? Sell them both, advertising them together, put them on the shelves near each other. And then they bought up some fast food chains. Another smart move. They bought Pizza Hut, they bought Taco Bell, they bought Kentucky Fried Chicken. And this makes a lot of sense because why? These are outlets for soda, right? They have it there. Sell someone a cup and let them drink as much of the stuff as they want, because the soda itself costs nothing. But when they're there, they can fill up. And so these fast food joints became essentially outlets for selling soda. Okay. All those companies, they're actually a separate company now called Yum Brands, but it's still owned by Pepsi indirectly. So it's still basically a way to sell soda. The other major phenomenon in the world of soda is the development of diet versions. And of course, they don't contain sugar, so it's fewer calories. And these have been sweetened with non-caloric chemicals, starting with cyclamates, which is the first, then saccharin. Nowadays it's aspartame. So there's various different non-nutritive sweeteners is what they're called. And you save the equivalent of, in a can, 15 teaspoons. That's fair. Tablespoons sounded horrifying. Well, it is horrifying too. 15 teaspoons of sugar in a bottle of soda. But on the other hand, you are putting some very serious, nasty tasting stuff in your body. I honestly don't know how anyone finds this stuff palatable. Diet soda just tastes acrid and nasty to me. But in any case, they started appearing on the market in the 1950s when a company called Kirsch Beverages started selling no-cal ginger ale and root beer, and then Royal Crown started selling Diet Right Cola in 1958. Coke came out with its own version, which is called Tab, a couple of years later. And about the same time, a woman who was born in Brooklyn, like me actually, similar background too, moved to Stockton, opened up a company canning tomatoes. Her name is Tilly Lewis. You might be familiar with there's a Tilly Lewis Road in Stockton. There's the Tilly Lewis Theater up at Delta College. But in any case, our local hero, Tilly, came out with the first nationally distributed line of diet foods, what was called the Tasty Diet. There was mostly canned fruit with saccharin, and also she started a soft drink line. There was even a cocktail named for her called the Tilly, which is 1 jigger of gin, the juice of 1/2 lime, cracked ice, fresh mint, and then the glass is filled with this low-calorie saccharin flavored ginger ale, which is if you use regular ginger ale, it's actually a really good drink with the mint and the and ginger ale with gin is wonderful. But in any case, this is diet stuff. So very interestingly, she bottled this stuff and canned and bottled it for supermarkets as well. So they would sometimes even put their own label on it, like, so, you know, ShopRite brand low calorie ginger ale, or Safeway, or whatever it may have been, right? So I think that she provides a fascinating glimpse at how these sodas were first marketed to people, and it was essentially by frightening them. Okay, this is going to sound interesting. And actually, if you're interested in this topic, there's a really interesting book by Carolyn de la Pena about the diet sweetener industry. And there's a whole chapter on Tilly. And actually, I wrote an article on this called The Tomato Queen of San Joaquin, which was in Gastronomica ages ago. But this is, and her papers are actually right here in the Hagen Museum. That's why I know about her. But in any case, how did they frighten people into using diet soda? Well, a story was invented that she had been scolded by her doctor for being overweight. And if you looked at pictures of her, she's actually not overweight at all, okay? Certainly never obese, but maybe she perceived herself this way, who knows? But this was an ad campaign. And an article clipped from an unidentified Newark newspaper begins like this, okay? This is the ad copy that they ran, obviously a very expensive ad agency came up with this. Once upon a time, a short, rather plump woman went to see her doctor about losing weight. Okay, she was not rather plump. An article in the 1953 St. Louis Globe-Democrat relates that her doctor looked at her sternly and said, "Look, you're in the cannery business. If anyone can do something about it, you can." So the story goes, she set up a laboratory. It was actually a guy in Manteca. His name was Wiest, who started the laboratory. Tilly didn't, but okay. And they started reformulating diet foods. So this is a quote. "There's good news for folks who must reduce diet to reduce, especially for folks who, like myself, are afflicted with a sweet tooth and can't resist the rich sweet foods that carry such a heavy penalty of fattening calories. Is that your trouble too?" And this is in the ad, okay? Ingenious advertisements posed empathy with the weak reader, okay, making the entire line a personal solution to obesity, and the idea that Tilly was sharing this with you generously. She said, "I have a problem too, and if you can't resist sweets, use these diet products, including my diet soda." And the ad claimed that Tilly lost 26 pounds while on the diet, and so the people identified her personally with the diet line. She spent a fortune on a whirlwind publicity campaign, kept a scrapbook of visits around the country, which I've seen. It's really interesting. And then this is, the 50s, basically. And then ads ran in newspapers. She appeared on TV and cooking shows. And she also sent free dieting packages to doctors so they could begin to prescribe this diet to her overweight patients. And actually, I've got a copy of it somewhere in my office. Hang on one second. Don't know what I did with the diet thing, but this is one of the ads. This is an actual ad that I framed, the Tasty Diet, and you can see that it's got all sorts of dreadful products. And there she is. Okay, she's not rather plump, I should think, but you now get low-calorie foods as delicious as high-calorie foods. And this is where did this run? But it's because a doctor put Tilly on a diet. So the ad says. And I've actually, I don't know what I did with it, but I've got her little diet book here somewhere also, which is fascinating. But in any case, the Chicago Tribune said, "Here is the real secret for successful, joyous, no willpower needed dieting. No going without for you. And this is the key to modern dieting. If you think of it, distinguish it from everything that went before. The idea was that this diet would be simple, effortless, and all you had to do was buy these branded products." The 21-day Tasty Diet menu insisted that calorie counting is not needed. Dieting can be pleasant, and a slimmer, more youthful, more attractive figure will be yours under this reducing plan. So that, I think, is modern dieting in a nutshell. Okay, that explains it. It takes no willpower, no forbearance. All you have to do is purchase something. There were also scare tactics. As I said, in 1955, an ad warned that obesity is probably America's #1 public enemy. 40 or 50 million people are overweight, and this makes them subject to many diseases. And the ad article, it's an ad really, also turns the diet into a personal mission for Tilly, who confessed that years ago when my physician told me I had to lose weight, he warned me of the black mood, the irritability, the rebellion that would come over me because I had to give up foods that I liked best. I vowed that I would find an easier way. And in the course of this diet that takes place, that's sold, it's in the newspapers, so you can actually follow it for 21 days. By the 20th day of the diet, there appear these testimonials, and I find them fascinating. A mother of 3 who's 34 years of age lost 31 pounds on the plan and said it changed her life. Best of all, she said, my husband and I get along much better. Now they dance and bowl, we share each other's lives again, she said. And this enforces the notion that a woman should only find her self-value, her perception of worth in the eyes of a man, and that would be impossible unless she had a slim figure. It frightens them, right? There's another quote. Remember, please, that long life and healthy, happy one does not go with being overweight, so keep vigilant. Okay, it's like kind of frightening you. You're going to be unhappy if you get fat. The article continues that if you have lost weight with the plan after 21 days, it's best to start over and continue to purchase the product. So it's clearly, not 21 days. And as with all weight loss diets, there is an appeal to health. It's saying you're going to be healthier, but what they're really selling is happiness and love and an improved and transformed life. And to give you a piece of evidence of this nature, another success story was told by Mrs. Lillian Corzine of Chicago, whose husband took her to court for divorce because she was just too fat, it said. She was 5 feet tall and weighed 190 pounds, and the judge suggested a 5-month delay on the proceedings only if she could lose the 50 pounds. And Mrs. Lewis got a hold of this person, put her on her diet, and it worked, providing living proof of the success. And of course they lived happily, she and her husband lived happily ever after and never got divorced. So the goal here is to get readers to start to scrutinize their own bodies. Begin to worry, oh, is my husband gonna divorce me because I'm getting too plump? It's what is called, well, let me give you some theory here. There's a classic article by Michel Foucault, the philosopher, that talks about a prison designed by another philosopher a century or more before, Jeremy Bentham, which is called the Panopticon. And basically it was a prison that had a round cell in the middle, and all the spokes of the cells, the rooms were lined up around it. And the people were told there's a guy in the center who can see what you're doing at all times. Now, in fact, there wasn't. But the point was that they would begin to self-monitor themselves because they thought they were being watched in Bentham's ideal prison, which cost much less because he didn't need so many guards. And Foucault said, well, this is basically what diets do to us too, right? They scare us. They make us monitor ourselves, even if it's not necessary or even if there isn't any external criticism. They make us do it to ourselves. There's a wonderful theoretical article by Susan Bordeaux, if you're interested in reading more about this. The goal is to instill feelings of guilt in primarily the female readers, so they scrutinize their own weight to stave off possible rejection and buy this product. Okay, the goal is always buy, right? So it was ad campaigns like this that made diet sodas a permanent feature of our gastronomic culture. Fresca was a really popular one when I was a kid in the 70s. It was grapefruit soda. So let's think a little bit more deeply about how soda fits into the US culture, because I think in several respects it's sort of unique. When soda was first sold in drugstores, it had a specific place and time and social setting where you consumed it. You had to go there, you had to sit at the counter, you had people to your right and left. And to some extent, you had to engage with them, right? Because you're sort of close with them, to them. But once soda was bottled, it becomes something you can take any time of day in any place. You can do it by yourself. You can do it with others, but it's not really a sociable drink necessarily. And the irony is that if it's well sold, you're almost never far from a place that sells it, which would be a store or, of course, a vending machine when they're sold in that. So, like snack culture, soda defies all constraints in definition. It's not tied to any one place or time or social setting or meal or anything, okay? And apart from things like parties or picnics or barbecues where you have soda as an alternative to alcohol for children or for adults who don't want to drink, whatever, soda doesn't really go with meals. It is not necessarily associated with them. And I think at some level, I think soda should not be thought of in the same category with any of the drinks we've been discussing so far, because apart from the fact that it happens to be a liquid, it bears very little similarity to these other drinks. If we think about it, what is soda? Fundamentally, it's flavored sugar, right? With liquid, with water. So it's really much more closely related to candy. On the other hand, you might argue that sugar, and especially in this form, is very addictive. So it's kind of behaves like alcohol, and if there's a certain social, if there's a certain way you're used to drinking it ritually, it is as addictive as coffee or a drink at night or whatever it may be. So people do it for the but how and when we decided that this change would go from these funky medicinal 19th century nerve tonics that suddenly would become a ubiquitous drink. That's what I think is really fascinating and weird and very, very different than wine, which of course always has drinkers and non-drinkers and people in between. So along with the other recent renaissance in craft and artisanal drinks, there has been a bizarre reawakening of old soda labels. It's partly for kitsch value, but it's partly that these companies have been around, but suddenly they found a way to market and sell themselves. So this whole wall of soda that you'll find in a good liquor store now includes things like Orange Crush, knee-high grape soda, the Moxie that I talked about. You can find sarsaparilla nowadays, which was almost extinct a couple of decades ago. You find birch beer, which is another thing that was really, it's made out of the inner pith of a brown birch tree. And it's a lovely, lovely flavor, sort of like root beer, but different flavor. And suddenly that's come back. It's something that I used to make it in the woods when I was a kid by peeling birch trees, and those would ferment, on their own if you had sugar. But nowadays it's a soda. So there's a Cheerwine soda. There's Dr. Brown's Celery, which is a hallowed institution in New York City delis. They never serve alcohol for reasons that I don't know why they don't. But you can get celery soda there. I know it sounds really weird, but it's good stuff. There's also Manhattan Special, which is a super sweet espresso soda. And then I think what is probably one of the most bizarre and deranged of all soft drinks is made from the I think it's made out of a byproduct of the dairy industry. This is called Yoo-hoo. It's a weird chocolate kind of thing that originated in the 20s, but it's still around. You can find it. It's sort of artificial chocolate flavored milky soda. It's gross. There is actually also a bacon soda made by a company called Lester's Fixins. They do buffalo wings, sweet corn. They launched ranch dressing soda. I guess for people in the Midwest, because ranch dressing is a beverage in the Midwest, right? So, in any case, it's supposedly very vile, but but let's talk about the more interesting thing, is we suddenly realize that soda is not so great for you. Michael Bloomberg, the mayor of New York City, once more or less declared war on soda companies, outlawing the big gulps and things like that. And the assumption, of course, is that people are too stupid and irresponsible to order food and beverages in ways that will not damage their health. So the state has to serve as a nanny, right? Okay, so making laws to save them from the clutches of irresponsible vendors of things like soda. I have to admit, I'm kind of in sympathy with the law, but it opens up a very fascinating question about the role of the government. if we have no qualms about paying for, say, anti-smoking campaigns, there's one on the ballot right now, um, they have a direct impact on health. Why would we balk at limiting soda consumption? Why is this a right and a freedom to consume a gallon of soda at a time? I think the link to obesity rates is fairly clear. Why not just slap an exorbitant tax on it? And economists will step in and tell you, well, you know, vice taxes don't curb consumption. They just make more money for the government. They actually don't do anything. And people happily pay for it and usually buy less of whatever they would be purchasing otherwise, like food, okay? So it really is just a way to make money for the state. And I've always, kind of doubted that inherently, but let me give you a case in point. Is the country of Norway, which has an extraordinarily high level of alcoholism compared to anywhere. And if you go anywhere, a beer has a standard price. It's $12 for an absolute ordinary bottom of the line beer. There are prohibitive taxes on cigarettes are even more. If you buy a little packet of rolling tobacco, it costs $36. This was just a few years ago when I was there. It's now, it was $5 in the United States, and now we have a double tax, so it's about $10 in the U.S. Did either of these curb consumption? No, you see people smoking everywhere in Norway. So what good did it do? And actually, you see 7-Elevens everywhere in Norway, which is even weirder, and everywhere in Japan also. It's a really, really strange state. So the other major question is, why would a state limit my freedom to do with what I want to my own body, right? And the arguments run, well, we're really worrying about children here. They're not at an age of discretion to limit their consumption. And if stupid parents won't do it, then we need to take soda machines out of cafeterias and soda vending machines away from children, because they'll purchase it and their parents let them, and it's damaging them. Okay, but what about adults? Isn't it their own business if they want to drink a liter of Coke on their own? So I think I have great sympathy for the side that says, personal freedom and responsibility is up to the individual. The state shouldn't decide these things. And of course, if you really want to drink Coke, you could buy 6 bottles, drink it all at once. And on the other hand, if you think about the consequences of this, the medical health, the diabetes, the heart disease, the obesity, whatever, it's going into the general fund of insurance companies, and ultimately we are paying for treatment. All of us as individuals, out of the health premiums we pay, are paying for those people who abuse themselves. So the burden is actually passed on to the public. Whether we drink soda or not, you're paying for the medical care that other people are incurring on themselves. So it's really not freedom. It's not as much as it sounds. So I'm not suggesting I have a solution for any of this. I'm just throwing out there that, like alcohol and tobacco, soda will probably end up being a controlled substance, especially when there's good sources about it. Oh, read Marion Nestle's recent book about soda politics. It's great. But we will certainly, even before banning it, we will restrict access. We'll put heavy taxes on it. We will have educational programs sponsored by the government to help people drink less. So it is, in that respect, exactly like alcohol and tobacco. It's treated as an intoxicant, even though it really doesn't intoxicate you. Well, it does give you a sugar high, right? But it's something that we will, on the one hand, control, but ironically, we won't ban it. Partly because we've had a bad taste of prohibition and we know it will go on the black market, but it's also primarily because we invest in corn syrup. We invest in the agriculture of this country is geared toward making corn syrup, and if we really restricted soda, those companies would have to grow broccoli or asparagus or something else, and we don't want them to do that. So it's a predicament that actually we've seen throughout the entire course, is how do you curb consumption on the one hand and restrict it, and how do you, on the other hand, promote production, because it's tax revenue for the company, for the government, and it's something we want to support because those people are voters, and the agricultural lobby is very powerful. And if we were to just say tomorrow, sorry, soda's bad for you, we're banning it, and we're not letting children anywhere near it, the health consequences would probably be very good. But the rest of the country would go up in arms. So this is some weird conundrum we're in, and I want you to ponder, especially since next week on the ballot will be legislation to legalize marijuana. It's kind of similar. Well, it's obviously a different substance, but a lot of the same issues are involved here. But from the opposite direction. Right now, everyone's drinking it. We want to ban it. This is going the opposite. But just realize we're in a state of flux on all these issues. That's what I find fascinating. So we'll discuss that next time. See ya.